The grime of the Middle Ages, why laundry mattered. In the hushed, dirt-lined corridors of medieval time, cleanliness was not an ideal, it was a puzzle. The Middle Ages, stretching roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, were defined not only by castles and plagues but by fabric. Lots and lots of fabric. Tunics, linens, undergarments, wimples, hose, and all of it needed cleaning eventually. And so began the slow, repetitive rhythm of laundry. The air in medieval towns was thick, with smoke from hearths, with the musk of bodies wrapped in wool, with the constant tread of feet over earth that turned to mud after a light rain. In such an environment, garments became soiled not just from wear but from the very atmosphere. Clothes absorbed the life around them, sweat, soot, grease, and the faint but constant scent of livestock. But laundry in the Middle Ages was no simple affair. It was laborious, often communal, and deeply intertwined with social roles and survival. Washing one's clothes wasn't just a chore, it was a responsibility, often passed down through class and gender. Poor women, particularly peasant wives, took on the burden of laundering for their families. Nobles, on the other hand, delegated the task to servants and washerwomen, who formed their own subculture of quietly powerful laborers. In a time when medical understanding was sparse and bathing was feared by some as unhealthy, laundering fabric became an essential path to hygiene. Doctors of the time sometimes recommended that garments be washed to prevent illness. For many, washing linen, especially undergarments worn next to the skin, was a key part of avoiding disease. While outer clothing might be worn for days or weeks without a rinse, inner linens were washed more frequently, though frequently still often meant monthly or seasonally. The grime of the era was not just physical. It was symbolic. Filthy clothing was seen as shameful, a mark of sloth or sin. Religious sermons sometimes equated dirty garments with moral corruption. Thus, laundry carried more than just a physical purpose, it bore the weight of reputation, piety, and cleanliness of the soul. Despite these associations, most people lived close to dirt. Floors were earthen, water was fetched in buckets, and washing required effort, heating water, hauling it, beating fabric, wringing it by hand. The need to clean had to be weighed against the cost in time and energy. It was often reserved for days of good weather, for long afternoons when children could help, or when water sources were accessible and not frozen. This chapter begins our long, uneventful walk through the world of medieval laundry, a world of suds, steam, stains, and silence. For as boring as it might seem, the history of how people kept their garments clean reveals much about how they lived, how they worked, and what they valued. So, let us trudge deeper into the fog of early centuries, where buckets clinked, water steamed, and washerwomen bent low over linen that had soaked up the Middle Ages itself. Washing by the river, communal life and cold water. In a world without plumbing or washing machines, the river was the laundress's workshop. Long before laundries were brick-walled buildings or metal drums spun with electric hums, the washing place was often a bend in the riverbank, shaded by trees, lined with stones, or, in rare luxury, outfitted with a worn wooden platform. Throughout medieval Europe, rivers, brooks, and communal wells became the heart of domestic labor. Laundry was not a solitary affair. It was public, rhythmic, and noisy in its own quiet way, with the splashing of water, the clapping of cloth being beaten against flat stones, and the chatter of women filling the air like low birdsong. Washerwomen gathered in the early light. Carrying heavy bundles of soiled linens in wicker baskets or knotted cloth sacks, they would make their way to the water. There, the process began. soaking the fabric in cold river water, scrubbing with ash-based lye, rinsing, beating, wringing, it was all done with aching backs, red hands, and unwavering repetition. In winter, the work grew harsher. Ice would sometimes form along the river's edge. Women would break the crust of frost, plunging their bare arms into near-freezing water. Skin cracked, joints stiffened. Yet the laundry had to be done. Some villages built wooden laundry huts near water sources, with slanted roofs and open sides, offering only the faintest shield from the cold. In warmer months, laundry days were social events, filled with gossip, storytelling, and the subtle weaving of community bonds. The clothes themselves, made mostly of linen and wool, behaved differently in cold water. Linen could be light but stubborn with stains. Wool required care, for it could shrink or felt if treated too roughly. The women knew how to handle each fabric, which ones needed more lye, which ones could be aired, which needed scrubbing with a wooden beetle or paddle. For peasants and townsfolk alike, the river was the great equalizer. Even noble servants brought garments to be washed in the same waters that served the rest of the village. Though some wealthier households had access to private washing areas, stone basins within walled gardens or cistern-fed troughs, many still relied on natural sources, especially in rural regions. There were unspoken rules, too. Some towns designated specific spots along the river for laundry use, to avoid polluting drinking water downstream. In cities, laws regulated when and where washerwomen could do their work. Breaking these rules could result in fines, not because cleanliness was so highly valued, but because the disorder of unregulated laundry could interfere with city hygiene and water supply. The repetitive, communal nature of river washing created a kind of slow rhythm that became part of life's fabric. It was dull work, yet deeply necessary, connecting women across generations and seasons. Hands that scrubbed also taught, passed down knowledge of stain remedies, fabric care, and water patterns. Some even said that the best washers could feel the dirt lift from cloth without looking. So much of the Middle Ages was wet, from the weather, from the lack of drainage, from the very nature of survival, and the laundry river became its reflection. Cold, steady, and ever-moving, it witnessed the burdens and conversations of those who lived quietly along its banks. Soaps, suds, and ashes, what they used to clean. Long before commercial soap sat in tidy rows on market shelves, cleanliness relied on alchemy born from ashes, fats, and patience. In the medieval world, soap was not universally used, and even when it was, it did not resemble the neatly molded bars we know today. It was crude, caustic, and often handmade, a product of necessity rather than luxury. At the heart of the medieval cleaning process was lye, an alkaline solution made by filtering water through ashes. Typically, women would collect whitewood ash, considered best for lye production, from hearths or village kilns. The ashes were then placed in a wooden barrel or sieve lined with straw. Water, often rainwater, was slowly poured through. The resulting liquid, clear or slightly yellow, was the potent lye solution used for softening stains and breaking down grease in garments. This lye was not gentle. It burned skin if too strong, and when combined with animal fats or kitchen grease, it could form a soft, jelly-like substance, rudimentary soap. In wealthier homes or monasteries, this soap mixture might be boiled and stored in ceramic pots. Among poorer households, the lye alone often sufficed for basic cleaning. Some washerwomen even enhanced it with crushed herbs like rosemary or sage, not for fragrance, but for their reputed antibacterial properties. Wool was delicate and could not tolerate the harshness of lye. Linen, on the other hand, could be soaked and scrubbed with it more robustly. For particularly grimy garments, fabrics were left to steep overnight in tubs filled with water and lye. In the morning, they were agitated, rinsed, and sometimes soaked again. There was no concept of one cycle, just repetition, often for hours. In southern Europe, particularly in Spain and Italy, early forms of olive oil soap began to appear during the later Middle Ages. These soaps, softer and less caustic, were prized for use on fine fabrics and bodies alike. Still, such soaps were expensive and rare outside urban centers. Most villagers never encountered them. For stains, wine, grease, mud, other household materials were employed. Fuller's earth, a type of clay, helped draw out oils from cloth. Urine, rich in ammonia, was sometimes used to bleach and whiten linen. In larger towns, urine was even collected in designated containers for such purposes. The smell was unpleasant, but its efficacy was known. And in an age where survival trumped comfort, smell was secondary. Despite the harshness of materials, there was a kind of folk wisdom in how these substances were balanced. Generations of washerwomen knew just how much ash, how long to soak, and which mixtures might restore a garment from grime to usability. Recipes were passed down orally, from grandmother to granddaughter, from one servant to the next. Soap itself was sometimes sold in blocks, other times traded, and occasionally crafted by monks in monastery workshops. These early soap makers boiled animal fats with lye in iron pots, stirring for hours until the mixture thickened. It was then poured into wooden molds to cool and harden. Though crude, these soaps laid the groundwork for more refined techniques that would arrive in later centuries. The medieval laundry was not filled with bubbles or floral fragrance. Rather, it was steeped in steam, pungent with ash, and textured by years of experimentation. The act of washing became a chemical affair, primitive, perhaps, but undeniably practical. Beating, boiling, and drying, the process step by step. Medieval laundry was not a simple rinse and repeat affair. It was a long, physical, and often exhausting ritual of steps, each one essential, each one passed down by observation and habit rather than written rule. When we speak of doing the laundry in the Middle Ages, we mean an entire day, or more, of labor, often shared, always slow. It began with sorting. Clothing and linens were divided by fabric and dirt level. Fine linens were handled separately from coarse woolens. Heavily soiled items were treated apart from lighter worn garments. Certain stains required special soaking or scrubbing. Children's clothes, undergarments, bed linens, all had their own rhythm in the wash. Then came the soaking phase. Clothes were placed in large wooden tubs, barrels, or stone troughs filled with cold or slightly warmed water. If available, lye or soap solution was added. For deeper cleans, the laundry would be left to steep for several hours, sometimes overnight. This allowed dirt to loosen from the fibers. The water, gradually darkening, would be poured off and replaced. There were no water taps, it was fetched by hand, bucket by bucket. After soaking came the most physically demanding part, beating and scrubbing. Washerwomen used wooden paddles, known as beetles, to slap the cloth against smooth stones or flat surfaces. The motion was rhythmic, whack, rinse, whack, sending splashes of water and suds into the air. This method dislodged soil, sweat, and grease from the weave of the fabric. For small stains, scrubbing with knuckles or brushes made of bundled twigs was common. In colder climates or seasons, when river access was poor, boiling became a necessary step. Water was heated in iron pots or large copper cauldrons over open fires. The clothes, especially linens, were submerged and stirred gently with long sticks. Boiling helped kill lice, fleas, and bacteria. It also loosened dirt that couldn't be scrubbed out cold. But it was dangerous and taxing, requiring constant attention to avoid scorching or overflowing. After the wash, came rinsing. This was often done with fresh water carried from wells or streams. Garments were wrung out by hand, twisted tightly until no more liquid dripped. This step could take as long as the wash itself, especially for heavy sheets or blankets. Then came drying, and here nature played a central role. In good weather, laundry was hung on lines strung between trees, poles, or pegs hammered into wooden fences. In towns, clothes might be spread on bushes, laid on hedgerows, or hung on wooden racks. Sunlight bleached and purified. The breeze softened. In winter, items sometimes froze before drying, stiff like parchment, needing to be brought indoors to thaw and finish. If space allowed, large linens were laid flat in fields or courtyards to dry in the open. Some washerwomen used smooth wooden frames or stretched fabric over ropes to avoid creases. Others relied on haylofts or attic rafters, dusty but dry, to air the clothes slowly when skies turned gray. The final step, though not always performed, was beating the dry garments once more, this time not for cleaning, but for softening. Cloth, especially linen, dried stiff. By beating it gently with rods or folding and pressing it beneath heavy stones, the fibers could be loosened. There was no folding standard, no scented drawer liners. Clean clothes were stacked, covered in cloth to keep off soot, or bundled and returned to homes. And then the cycle began again, slowly, endlessly, season by season, wash by wash. Laundry workers, washerwomen, monks, and servants. Laundry in the Middle Ages did not wash itself. It required hands, calloused, cracked, disciplined hands. The burden of cleanliness fell not upon those who wore the clothes, but upon those tasked with removing the dirt from them. These laborers, often invisible in medieval records, formed a quiet but essential part of daily life. The washerwoman. In villages and towns across Europe, washerwomen were a common sight. Typically poor and female, they worked seasonally or weekly for households with more garments than hands. These women knew how to make lye from ash, how to treat wool versus linen, and when to scrub, soak, or boil. Their labor was physical, repetitive, and wet. Clothing came to them in bundles and was returned, if all went well, clean and folded. Some washerwomen worked for hire, receiving coin or bread in exchange for their efforts. Others were part of the household staff, especially in larger homes, castles, or manor estates. The title of laundress was recognized in household roles, and some even had assistants or apprentices. Despite the skill required, laundresses ranked low in the domestic hierarchy, often below cooks, chambermaids, and stewards. The washerwoman's life was dictated by weather, by stains, and by the hands that brought her the soiled garments. She worked quietly near rivers, in courtyards, or in the shadows of castles. Some wore aprons, others wrapped their skirts to the knee. They were known by name in small towns, often widows or unmarried women with no other means of income. They were respected, tolerated, and occasionally ridiculed, depending on the region and the wealth of their clientele. Monks and laundry. Surprisingly, monasteries were also centers of laundering. Monks, particularly those in Benedictine and Cistercian orders, followed strict routines that included cleanliness. While bathing was rare, laundering was encouraged. Monasteries often had lavanderia, dedicated washhouses or outbuildings for clothing and linen. Within the cloister, lay brothers often handled manual labor, including washing. In some communities, monks themselves did laundry as part of their vow of humility. They collected garments in silence, washed them with lye and warm water, and hung them along the cloister walls or in enclosed drying rooms. Monastic records sometimes noted expenditures for soap, cloth, or new cauldrons, suggesting that laundering, while dull, was a vital part of their regimen. Monastic laundries were also among the first to use drainage channels and water control systems to manage their laundry work. In this way, they contributed not only to cleanliness, but to early sanitation innovation. Servants and castle staff. In noble homes and castles, the task of laundry fell to servants. These might include maids, scullery workers, and dedicated laundresses. In some grand households, laundering was organized on a large scale, entire chambers used for washing, drying, and storing linens. Servants washed bedding, towels, undergarments, and household cloth like table linens and banners. Outer clothing, especially heavy robes and fur-lined garments, were cleaned less often and handled with great care. Only trusted staff touched noble clothing. Mistakes could be costly. Damaging fine fabric or misplacing a garment might cost a servant their position. In cities, guilds for laundry workers began to emerge late in the medieval period, particularly in France and parts of Italy. These early organizations allowed professional laundresses to organize, set prices, and train apprentices. But they remained largely informal and under the shadow of larger guilds. Whether river washerwoman, monastic lay brother, or castle servant, the people who did laundry lived lives of quiet repetition. They worked in the background, forgotten in grand tales and tapestries, yet were essential to the comfort and appearance of everyone above them. Seasons of clean, how laundry changed with the weather. Laundry in the Middle Ages did not follow a weekly routine, nor did it appear on tidy calendars pinned to kitchen walls. Instead, it followed a slower, more natural rhythm, dictated not by habit, but by weather, temperature, and daylight. In this world, the act of washing was not just about effort, it was about timing. Spring, the season of renewal. With the return of warmth and the soft thaw of riverbanks, spring was a favored season for deep washing. As ice melted and water flowed freely again, washerwomen emerged from winter's stillness to clean what had built up over months of cold. Heavy woolens and thick bedding, rarely washed during winter, were aired out, beaten, and, if possible, washed and laid out under the lengthening sun. The days were not yet hot, but warm enough to dry linens without stiffening them with frost. The scent of ash and steam mingled with budding blossoms and damp soil. In many places, spring laundry became a kind of ritual, a time to freshen the home, prepare for new life, and lift the weight of winter. Families with large stores of cloth planned laundry days around dry spells and wind patterns, hoping to make the most of clear skies before the arrival of spring rains. Summer, sun-dried simplicity. Summer was, without question, the ideal season for laundry. Long days, strong sun, and warm breezes made it possible to wash large quantities of cloth and dry them quickly. Washerwomen could work for hours without fear of frozen fingers or sudden storms. Rivers ran full, and drying lines were never empty. During summer, White linens could be laid flat on grass or hedges to bleach in the sun, a natural whitening process aided by heat and time. Large cloths, such as table coverings or altar linens, were often spread out on fields or tied to barn rafters. The sun not only dried the fabric but helped remove odors and yellowing. It was common in some regions to do bulk washing during the warmest months, creating a store of clean garments that might last into autumn. Some monasteries even scheduled their laundering work to align with summer's efficiency, noting dates and weather in household records. But the heat brought its own challenges: swarms of insects, the risk of souring water left too long in buckets, and the physical toll of bending and lifting under the burning sun. Still, most agreed, if laundry had to be done, let it be done in summer. Autumn, the last wash before cold. Autumn marked the final opportunity for large laundry efforts before winter's grip set in. Washerwomen hurried to wash the last of the harvest-stained clothes, clean the woolen layers that would be worn daily in colder months, and ready the blankets and cloaks that would not see water again until spring. Leaves fell, air cooled, and winds turned brisk. Drying took longer, and laundry had to be brought in quickly before sudden rain. In many homes, autumn laundry was more strategic, focused on necessity rather than routine. Only what must be cleaned was cleaned. The rest was folded and shaken out, brushed, and repurposed. Some households preserved clean laundry by storing it with lavender or sage, not for scent but to deter pests. Others bundled their linens tightly in chests and hoped no mice or mildew found their way in during the long winter ahead. Winter, the season of stillness. In winter, laundry slowed. Rivers froze. Fires were needed for warmth, not water. Hands stung with every splash. And so, most families avoided large washings altogether. Clothes were brushed, shaken out, and aired beside the hearth. Linens were reused, patched, and turned inside out. Only essential laundering was attempted: a child's soiled tunic, undergarments that could not wait, or tablecloths stained by winter feasts. These were washed in small batches, with water heated indoors and dried near fires or in lofts. In wealthier homes, where staff and resources allowed, limited winter laundering continued, often done indoors or in enclosed washhouses. But for most, winter was a time of preservation, not cleaning. Thus, the rhythm of laundry flowed with the seasons. Nature dictated what was possible, and human patience filled in the rest. There were no shortcuts, only quiet days and careful planning, and in between, the wind carried the scent of soap, ash, and the slow passage of time. Laundry in the castle versus cottage. Though all medieval people wore clothes, not all washed them the same way. Between the stone walls of grand castles and the wooden beams of humble cottages, the task of laundry diverged, not only in method but in scale, frequency, and symbolism. While the cottage scrubbed out of necessity, the castle cleaned for comfort, order, and social status. In the castle. Inside the fortified walls of a medieval castle, laundry was a surprisingly complex operation. Wealthy households accumulated textiles in abundance, not just clothing, but linens, bedding, wall hangings, tablecloths, tapestries, and embroidered cushions. These needed tending. And while not all of them were washed frequently, when they were, it was a coordinated effort involving multiple servants. Large households often included laundresses as part of the permanent domestic staff. These women reported to the housekeeper or chamberlain, depending on the region and hierarchy. The castle might have a dedicated laundry room or a designated courtyard space with access to water. In more advanced estates, Water was piped from cisterns or wells into stone basins. Soap and lye were kept in storage, along with firewood for heating. Laundry in castles followed a rhythm of inventory and order. Garments were marked with initials or stitches to keep track of ownership. Servants were assigned to specific loads, bed linens on one day, tablecloths on another, undergarments every fortnight, and so forth. The cleaning of noble garments, silks, velvets, and fur-trimmed robes, was done delicately, often by hand, sometimes not washed at all, but spot-cleaned with cloth and scented waters. Drying was done in enclosed courtyards, sunny terraces, or even linen rooms, interior chambers with ventilation and hanging space. In winter, drying racks might be placed near large hearths. The finished laundry was inspected, folded, and stored in chests, linen cupboards, or armoires, sometimes layered with dried herbs like lavender, wormwood, or mint to keep moths and dampness at bay. Cleanliness in a castle wasn't just about hygiene, it was about prestige. A well-kept hall, with crisp tablecloths and fresh-smelling garments, signaled power, order, and control. The nobility's reputation depended not only on armor and land but also on the quiet labor of those who washed and prepared their finery behind the scenes. In the cottage. The peasant cottage, by contrast, knew laundry as a matter of survival. With fewer clothes and even fewer luxuries, families had to make each garment last. Linens were worn until they soiled, mended when torn, and only washed when necessary. There was no spare bedding, only what was needed to sleep through the cold. No linen closets, only baskets or trunks, and not many. Washing took place outdoors, near rivers, wells, or communal wash areas. In the absence of soap, ash lye, or even just repeated rinsing, was used. In winter, as water froze and fires were precious, some garments might go unwashed for weeks or months. Dirt was not welcome, but it was tolerated. If a child soiled a tunic, it was scrubbed immediately. If a wool cloak smelled of smoke, it was shaken and brushed, not laundered. There were no servants to do the work. Mothers, daughters, and grandmothers worked together, their efforts timed around field labor, animal care, and baking. Water was carried in buckets, firewood gathered, and fabrics beaten with wooden paddles or scrubbed by hand. A good drying day was a blessing. Rain meant delay. Mud meant more stains. Even so, cottages had their own systems. Sunday garments were kept cleaner. Linens were aired in sunshine when possible. Clothes were stored carefully, even if space was tight. Some cottages hung cloth from ceiling beams or pegged it above the hearth, letting the smoke dry and send it slowly over time. While castles had volume and system, cottages had care and frugality. Every garment washed was a labor counted. Every drop of water carried was remembered in the ache of the arms. The work was smaller in scale but not in importance. Religious rules and cleanliness in monastic life. In the quiet stone walls of medieval monasteries, where bells marked the passage of hours and chants echoed in cloisters, cleanliness held a different kind of meaning. It was not a matter of appearance or comfort alone, it was tied to spiritual discipline, obedience, and order. Within this sacred rhythm, laundry became both a practical task and a quiet act of devotion. Cleanliness as a spiritual symbol. In medieval monastic thought, the outer garment often reflected the inner soul. Clean linens were more than just hygienic, they were symbolic. White, in particular, was associated with purity and chastity, especially in the robes of monks and nuns. Dirt could be tolerated on sandals and hands, but soiled habits and linens were frowned upon, especially during sacred rituals or holy days. The rule of Saint Benedict, followed by many Western monastic communities, encouraged moderation, simplicity, and routine personal care. While the rule was not overly detailed on laundry, it emphasized cleanliness of both body and spirit. Monks were allowed to bathe occasionally and change undergarments, especially in warmer climates or after physical labor. These changes necessitated regular laundering. Monastic laundry operations. Larger monasteries developed structured laundry systems, often assigning specific lay brothers or hired workers to the task. These individuals were not necessarily part of the religious order but worked under the monastery's management. In some communities, however, monks themselves took turns with laundry duties as part of their humble labor, just as they worked in gardens, kitchens, or scriptoria. Monasteries often had a dedicated lavatorium or lavanderia, a place for washing hands and laundry. These might include stone basins, channels for water, and wooden drying racks. Nearby, one could find boiling pots, barrels of ash for lye, soap made from animal fat, and hooks or lines for drying. Washing was typically scheduled. Weekly undergarment washing was common in some orders. Bedding and robes were washed less often, depending on climate and resources. In warm regions, garments might be washed more frequently to prevent lice and odor. In colder ones, laundering was less frequent and supplemented with airing and brushing. The laundering process in monasteries closely resembled that of other medieval settings, soaking garments in warm water with lye or soft soap, scrubbing with paddles or brushes, rinsing, wringing, and drying. But in the monastic world, the atmosphere was more hushed, the work done in silence or accompanied by soft prayer. Laundry records and monastic order. Many monastic communities kept meticulous records, ledgers that included cloth inventories, washing schedules, soap purchases, and expenses for mending or replacing garments. These records offer glimpses into how seriously laundry was taken, especially in well-run abbeys and priories. Some monasteries even had staff responsible solely for textile care, including sewing, folding, dyeing, and washing. Certain religious ceremonies required exceptionally clean linens, altar cloths, communion towels, and robes for feasts. These items were handled with care, often washed separately, and sometimes blessed before or after use. The laundering of such items was done with great reverence. Women's monastery. In convents, nuns handled their own laundry with equal discipline. In some orders, elderly or infirm nuns were exempt from heavy labor, but most others participated in rotating duties. Cleanliness in the convent was tied not just to ritual, but to personal humility. The act of kneeling beside a wash basin, scrubbing linen with reddened hands, was a quiet echo of the humility Christ embodied. Like their male counterparts, nuns kept their habits plain, often made of wool or undyed linen. Yet even these were kept neat and in good order. The convent laundry room, though small, was kept tidy, its tools arranged carefully, its linens hung with modest pride. In the world of medieval religion, laundry was neither glamorous nor avoided. It was simply one of many disciplines of daily life, a quiet, necessary practice folded into the fabric of spiritual routine. Whether done by lay hands or monastic ones, it was carried out with purpose, humility, and a slow awareness of time that modern minds rarely know. Linen, wool, and stains, the fabric challenge. Medieval laundry was never one-size-fits-all. The fabrics themselves, each with their own texture, origin, and behavior, dictated how laundry was done. Washerwomen, servants, and monastics alike had to learn the delicate art of handling linen, wool, and the relentless array of stains that found their way into every garment. Linen, the workhorse of the Middle Ages. Linen, spun from flax, was the most commonly laundered fabric in medieval Europe. From undergarments and bed sheets to tablecloths and religious vestments, linen was prized for its durability and absorbency. Unlike wool, it could be boiled, beaten, and scrubbed without as much risk of damage. Linen naturally resisted odors more than other fabrics, but it did show stains easily. Because of this, it was soaked, sometimes repeatedly, and laid out in the sun to bleach. Bright white linen, while rare among the poor, became a mark of order and cleanliness in wealthier households and monasteries. Washerwomen developed quiet expertise in working with linen. They knew which batches needed more soaking, when to boil and when to scrub gently. Folding it properly also mattered, not only for storage but to prevent deep creases that could set into the fiber and damage it over time. Wool, warmth with caution. Wool posed a much greater challenge. It was a staple fabric for cloaks, outer garments, blankets, and hoods, especially among the poor and in cold regions. But unlike linen, wool could not tolerate heat, rough agitation, or strong lye. If scrubbed too hard or boiled, wool had a tendency to felt, a process where fibers interlock tightly, shrinking and thickening the fabric into an unwearable mat. Thus, wool was rarely washed in full. Instead, it was spot cleaned, gently rinsed in lukewarm water, or simply aired out beside a hearth or in the open air. Some garments were brushed with bundles of reeds or stiff fibers to remove surface dirt. Others were treated with herbal rinses meant more to freshen than clean. In wealthier homes, wool was entrusted to specific servants trained in its care. Among the poor, damage was accepted, and garments were patched and repurposed until the fabric gave way. Stains, the persistent companions. Medieval life was messy. Without modern detergents or stain removers, laundry workers relied on a mixture of experience, patience, and household remedies to treat common marks and blemishes. Grease and oil from cooking or working with tools were often rubbed with ashes or soap made from animal fat. Fuller's earth, a naturally absorbent clay, was also used to draw out oily residue. Wine and berry stains were approached with cold water first. If that failed, they might be rubbed with a mixture of sour milk and chalk. Some washerwomen used fermented urine for its ammonia content, effective, but pungent. Blood was treated quickly with cold water before it could set. Salt might be rubbed into the fabric to draw out the stain. In monasteries, especially, garments soiled by blood were handled with both care and spiritual significance. Grass stains, mud, and soot were usually left to dry and then brushed away before washing. If scrubbing was needed, it was done with warm water and soap, always gently on wool, firmly on linen. In truth, many stains never fully came out. Medieval garments often bore the marks of life, small reminders of labor, celebration, illness, or accident. For the poor, these marks were lived with. For the wealthy, they were masked or replaced. For the monastic, they were accepted with humility. Laundry was not the pursuit of perfection. It was the soft management of imperfection, practiced with persistence and adapted for every type of cloth and every story told by stain and fiber. A gentle reflection, why medieval laundry still matters. When we think of history, our minds often leap to grand events, to kings, crusades, and castles. But the true rhythm of medieval life was measured in smaller gestures, a bucket carried to the river, a bar of soft soap rubbed between chapped hands, a sheet hung carefully in the sun. Laundry, in its humble persistence, was one of those quiet labors that held the world together. In the Middle Ages, people lived close to their work, and closer still to the earth. Dirt was not a nuisance, it was a presence. Mud clung to shoes, smoke to cloaks, and sweat to every thread. Laundry was how one reclaimed a little bit of freshness from the daily grime. It was never glamorous, never quick, and almost never complete. And yet, it was done, again and again, season after season.